The file begins. October 2025 was not a month, but a diagnosis. The unsealed documents were not just text. They were a digital autopsy conducted on a living man. The initial impact was not a loud explosion. It was the opposite. A profound, suffocating silence descended upon the palace. A silence heavier and more damning than any public statement could ever be. Pause. The monarchy, an institution built on spectacle, suddenly mastered the art of invisibility. Phones went unanswered. Curtains were drawn. The name, Pause Andrew, became a conversational black hole, sucking all light and air from the gilded rooms of London. This was the anatomy of a fall in real time. The public didn't just read the sordid details. They felt the cold draft from the open crypt. The stain of the pixels spread faster than royal gossip, seeping into the very fabric of the crown's narrative. His exile was no longer a matter of protocol. It was a quarantine. By 2026, the revelations were no longer events. They were the weather. A steady toxic rain of court filings and witness testimonies that no one could escape. Each new document was another turn of the screw, dismantling the carefully constructed facade of a life. The dread was no longer just his. It became a national pastime. People waited for the next data dump like a grim serialized drama. For the man himself, Royal Lodge ceased to be a home. It became a mausoleum with better upholstery, a shadow of the bunker. The creeping dread wasn't about the press or the public. Pause. It was about the silence from within his own family. The isolation was absolute. Every rustle of leaves outside was a potential photographer. Every ring of the phone, a summons he could not answer. This wasn't a life. It was a post-mortem audit of a reputation where the subject was forced to sit and watch the accountants tally up the sins. The empire of Andrew had fallen. Only the debris remained. But the debris was not from a single, recent explosion. The fault lines were ancient, etched into the bedrock of his very creation. He was born the spare, the second son. A life of immense privilege without the burden of ultimate responsibility. His youth was a currency he spent with the recklessness of a man who never had to earn it. The tabloids called him Randy Andy. It wasn't an accusation, it was a brand. For a time, the Falklands War provided a new coat of paint. The hero pilot, the nation's favorite son. The applause was a powerful solvent, washing away the scent of indiscretion. It gave him a sense of invincibility that would become his fatal flaw. He wasn't just a prince, he was a commodity, a walking, talking emblem of British prestige. And in the murky world of international arms deals and offshore finance, he navigated as a trade envoy. Prestige was the only collateral that mattered. The environments were always the same. Dimly lit clubs, private jets, yachts where the champagne was colder than the handshakes. He learned to speak the language of men who bought and sold influence like scrap metal. Pause. He thought he was one of them. He was merely their most valuable asset. In this ecosystem of transactional relationships, a new species of predator was emerging. One who understood the unique value of a tarnished prince. The introduction was not made in a palace. It was made in the social wilderness where British aristocracy and American money mingled. The bridge was a woman, a ghost from a disgraced dynasty, herself a master of reinvention. Pause. Ghislaine Maxwell. She didn't introduce a friend, she brokered a deal. Jeffrey Epstein didn't see a man. He saw a key to doors in London that money alone couldn't unlock. Their first meetings were anodyne, shrouded in the legitimate language of finance and philanthropy. Andrew saw a brilliant self-made financier who offered access to a world of unimaginable wealth. A peer. Epstein saw a royal with a hero's past and a libertine's appetite. A tool. It was not a friendship, it was an acquisition. The naivety was not in meeting him. The fatal error was in believing he, the prince, was the one in control of the transaction. A miscalculation that would be paid for installment by installment for the rest of his life. The first installment was not a bill. It was a whisper. A 2005 police report from Palm Beach, Florida. A name, Pause Jeffrey Epstein, now tethered to words like underage and investigation. For most of the world, it was background noise. For Pause. Andrew, it was a problem to be managed, not a friendship to be severed. The palace machinery, designed to muffle scandals, treated it as a public relations inconvenience. A brief turbulence at cruising altitude. But the whispers grew into articles. The articles became a non-prosecution agreement, a legal document so generous it felt less like justice and more like a tombstone placed over a crime scene while the body was still warm. Pause. Andrew did not run. He doubled down. A 2010 photograph taken after Pause Epstein's release would become the autopsy image of his royal career. The prince, a casual stroll through Central Park with the convicted. It was not a gesture of loyalty. It was a demonstration of immunity, a belief that the rules that governed other men did not apply to him. The rot was no longer hidden in the foundations. It was now a visible crack on the marble facade. The whispers finally became a summons. Virginia Giuffre's lawsuit was not an accusation. It was a detailed invoice for a stolen youth. The anatomy of the fall was now a legal document, filed in a New York court. Every denial from the prince was met with a new exhibit, a photograph, a flight log, a witness statement. His entire life was placed under a microscope, his alibis dissected with forensic precision. Cornered, he made his single greatest tactical error. He decided to speak. The BBC Newsnight interview was not an explanation. Pause. It was a public confession of his own detachment from reality. He offered up memories of a provincial pizza parlor and a peculiar inability to sweat. He thought he was building a defense. He was actually building his own cage. The world watched a prince dismantle his own mystique line by line. The testimony of the victim gave the scandal a face. The interview gave it a voice of baffling, entitled ineptitude. The verdict was delivered not by a jury, but by the public. Pause. Guilty of an unforgivable association. The price of the key Epstein had offered was finally clear. It was everything. But the verdict of the public was an inconvenience, not a sentence. The real machinery of survival now engaged, a system not of justice, but of preservation. We call it the firm. Its currency is silence. Its strategy is time. For months, a quiet war was waged in the corridors of power, an anatomy of containment. Phone calls that left no digital trace, meetings that were never minuted. The objective was simple: cauterize the wound, isolate the infected limb to save the body. Pause. They conducted an inventory of sins, a triage of secrets. They weighed the cost of every photograph, every flight log, every name in Epstein's little black book. And they found something. One piece of the puzzle that was not merely embarrassing, but existential. Not for the man, for the crown. It wasn't another photograph of a girl. It was a ledger, a quiet accounting of access and influence, brokered by a prince and a predator. The price was not money. Pause. It was proximity to the throne. The ledger sealed his fate. The wound could not be cauterized. The limb had to be severed. The process was not emotional. It was surgical. A public sentence to ratify a private one. First, the uniforms. The fabric of his identity, woven with military honors, now packed away in boxes like costumes from a forgotten play. Then, the patronages. The hundreds of charities and organizations that formed the architecture of his public life, dismantled brick by brick. Finally, the name itself. Pause, His Royal Highness. 3 words that conferred a form of divinity, now officially withdrawn. It was a public execution of his status, an official exile. His world shrank to the dimensions of a gilded cage, the Royal Lodge becoming a comfortable bunker against a hostile world. The true consequence, however, was not the loss of titles. It was the erosion of reality. He became a ghost at the feast, a blank space in the official narrative. The verdict was not just removal. Pause. It was erasure. Erasure was not enough for the public. The palace had performed a bloodless amputation, but the people demanded a pound of flesh. The digital town square became a gallows. Every news article, a fresh rope. Every comment section, a jeering crowd. The media, sensing the kill, descended not like journalists, but like carrion birds. Their long lenses were surgical instruments, dissecting his isolation from a mile away. His home was no longer a royal residence, it was Exhibit A. The man inside was no longer a prince. He was a specimen, a ghost story told in the present tense. His name became a social contagion. Old friends developed sudden amnesia. Invitations, once a torrent, dried to a desert. To be seen with him, to even speak his name in polite company, was to risk infection. This was not a fall from grace. Pause. It was a public exorcism. The damage was not to his reputation. It was to the very concept of his existence. The future he was born into had been foreclosed upon, permanently. And so we arrive at the final accounting. The anatomy of the fall is complete. The inventory of sins has been filed. The fatal error was not the friendship, not the island, not even the disastrous interview. The fatal error was a miscalculation of gravity, a belief baked into the bone over generations that the name Windsor was a shield against consequence. That privilege was a law of physics. He learned too late that truth is a patient creditor. It does not forget the debt. It simply waits. Nietzsche, the monarchy, an ancient and pragmatic beast, understood this. To save the crown, the limb had to be sacrificed. His exile was a brutal but necessary piece of political theater, a public demonstration that the rot had been contained. But the stain remains, a watermark of disgrace on the legacy of an entire era. What is left? A man in a gilded cage, surrounded by the cold comforts of wealth, but haunted by the ghost of a life he was supposed to have. There is no redemption arc here. There is only the long, quiet epilogue of a broken man. His legacy is not one of service or duty. It is a verdict, a permanent cautionary tale whispered in the stone corridors of power. Pause. Even from a throne, the fall is a long way down.